Hi everyone and welcome back to English Blossom. This month is all about Alice in Wonderland. So if you go to the English Blossom website, you'll be able to have a look at all sorts of worksheets and lesson plans to help you go to Wonderland in your ESL lessons. But now I want to talk to you about storytelling. I'm going to give you my top 10 tips for storytelling so that you can use it in your ESL classroom. Storytelling is fantastic. It helps students be more motivated, it provides them a relatable learning experience, and it's a fantastic opportunity for improving their reading and writing. So let's get started. So tip number 1. Buy the children's book. This one might seem a bit obvious, but some people do try to do storytelling off memory or to use the book that they know. Now, something like Alice in Wonderland was written a really long time ago. The language that's used in it is not necessarily language that your students are going to hear. So try and purchase a children's version of the book. It also makes it easier to translate the language for an ESL learner. You can also have a look through YouTube. There's loads of animated videos of books like Alice in Wonderland, Pinocchio, all of your kind of Disney classics are available through YouTube where people have adapted those stories. So go take a look at the kids version first. Number 2, do not read the book. That may sound a bit crazy, but what I mean by it is don't just sit and read the book to your students. That's the problem, is that a lot of people think that storytelling is just literally sitting down and reading a book like your parents did when you go to bed. Storytelling should be an entire adventure through a book. And this can go over as many lessons as you like. You might just look at a book in 1 hour, or you might look at a book over several lessons. But the key thing is to make that book and that storytelling like a teaching performance. You don't have to be an actor, you don't have to do all of the voices, but the children should be able to experience that book, not just sit quietly while you read to them. Number 3, identify your key words and learning aims. Now, this is necessary for any lesson, and storytelling is no exception. You need to identify what words, phrases, or grammar you want your students to have at the end of your storytelling session. You then can emphasize those words throughout your storytelling. So, for example, with Alice in Wonderland, it's a great opportunity to talk about big and small, opposites. And you can do this in your storytelling by having big grand gestures. And whenever this comes up, whenever she eats or drinks something, you make it big, you make it exciting, you make it a performance. To start off with, when she does this, we can go big and small. And then eventually, every time this comes up, you're gonna have your children already knowing what's gonna happen. Just make sure any keywords are really emphasized in your storytelling. Number 4, accept the unchangeable. If you've got really young learners, it is very, very hard to create a story, especially an engaging story, only using vocabulary that is suitable to their group. Now, this does mean that you might end up using some phrases or some individual words that feel like it's over their level. Don't panic. Try not to do it too much, but sometimes when you're trying to link a story, it's really hard, especially if they're at that kind of A1 level on the framework, to try and keep a story engaging when you can only use really small words. Just accept that you can't change that, but make sure that you're having that emphasis on the key words. You don't mind them not knowing those connecting words, but as long as they're coming out with those key learning aims that you've already identified. Number 5, identify a few key scenes. Alice goes on a huge adventure and meets a number of different characters. But when we're working with ESL learners, it can be difficult to have so many different scenes and so many different characters. So identify those key, memorable scenes that link to your learning outcomes. For example, in Alice in Wonderland, I might select the Mad Hatter's Tea Party. It's a really key scene, it's fun, it's memorable, but it can also allow me to teach my students things like ordering food and drink, introducing themselves, or even talking about different personality types at that table. The key thing is that I've used a simple, fun scene and I've put the English language in there. I don't have to go into every single detailed scene. Number 6, pre-teach and identify your characters. Before you even start going into the story, before you turn that first page of the book, do some pre-teaching. Introduce your key characters. You can use imagery for this, and if you do and you're doing it over a number of weeks, have those images either introduced to every single lesson, or if you're in a classroom, keep those images stuck up somewhere. You can also use this as an opportunity to introduce your first set of vocabulary. The key thing is that they know these characters, they kind of get an idea of where the story is going to go. You can even put in some of your English grammar. So yes, we identify Alice, but we might also say things like, what is she wearing? We might also identify what her goal is within the story. But the key thing is, before we've even stepped into that book, we already know the characters that are associated with it. Number 7, gestures, gestures, gestures. You probably already do this in your English lessons, and they are just as essential, if not more so, in storytelling. Try to have a different gesture for each of your characters, and obviously use those ones that we always do, things like hello, happy, or sad. Don't feel the need to have a gesture for every single word. It can get crazy if you do that. But once again, it's about going back to those key learning aims, and if it's things like big and small, making sure there's a gesture for your key words. If you're not sure what gesture to use, then have a look at sign language. Not only is this fantastic to use as a tool for getting some gestures out there, but it also gives your students the ability to communicate with somebody else. Number 8, set the scene. You can decorate your classroom. You can use a virtual background if you're doing an online lesson. A key thing to do is get your students involved in it as well. It doesn't have to be something crazy, but just simple things like making some flowers for Wonderland, getting some teacups. Simple things that can kind of set the scene and put your students inside the story. You can bring in, say, one prop a week, something like a top hat, just so they feel like they've been transported somewhere. And number 9, embed your activities. So this is where you need to go beyond storytelling. You want to make sure you have some activities or some worksheets to complete alongside your story. Now this can be a case of where you stop your story at some point to do an activity, which is quite beneficial because you want your students to keep doing different things. You don't want them just listening the whole time. Again, this will go back to those key learning aims. So for example, in Alice in Wonderland, I might have the learning aim of telling the time, so simple numbers and over. Now the great thing is, we have the White Rabbit character who carries around a watch. So why not adapt the game of What's the Time, Mr. Wolf to What's the Time, Mr. Rabbit, or What's the Time, White Rabbit, and have your students calling out the times. That way you put an activity in and you've got something quite near the beginning of your story that's reinforcing that vocabulary that they need to learn. And number 10, act it out. If you're not sure about an activity or a game or a worksheet to go along with it, then a really simple thing to do is to have your students come up and act out certain parts. Now, I'm not a fan of what I call parrot talk. So that's when you might have a student come up on stage, okay, you're gonna meet Alice. Can you say, my name is Alice? And the student repeats, my name is Alice. The problem with this kind of thing is that the student, when they're just constantly repeating what you've said, so I say this, you say this, they're not really actually learning or remembering afterwards. Now, this is a skill that can sometimes take time, and obviously it's where that pre-teach is very, very important. When you get your students to come up, something like my name is Alice is explained to students. So your name is Alice. So what's your name? My name, Alice. My name is Alice. It's about pulling that kind of vocabulary and those words out from them. Like I said, it takes time, but even if you just do parrot talk of having them repeat what you've said, it gets them up, it gets them speaking some English, and it's fun for them to take on a different character. So there we have it, my top 10 tips for using storytelling in your ESL classroom. There are a few example videos that you can go and have a look at of storytelling, and I'll put them down in the description box. And don't forget to go to the English Blossom website if you want to do an Alice in Wonderland themed lesson. There's all sorts of worksheets, character cards that you can use, and you can have a look at last month's theme, all about using science in your classroom. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next month.